In the quiet English village of Narborough, a 15-year-old girl named Linda Mann vanished on her way home. When she was found the next morning, a murder investigation began and quickly went nowhere. Police had no leads, no suspects, and no clue that the same killer was posed to strike again. They were hunting a monster in plain sight, and their only real hope wouldn't come from a detective, but from a scientific breakthrough so new it had never been used to catch a killer before. On November 21st, 1983, Linda Mann was found raped and strangled on a secluded footpath. The police did everything they could, but forensics back then wasn't what it is today. From a sample left at the scene, they knew the killer had type A blood. Sounds helpful, right? Well, that's a trait shared by about 10% of all men. With thousands of potential suspects and nothing else to go on, the trail went cold. Meanwhile, the community was terrified, knowing a murderer was walking among them. For 3 long years, there was only silence. Then on July 31st, 1986, it happened again. Another 15-year-old Dawn Ashworth was murdered in a nearby town. The crime scene was disturbingly familiar, and forensics analysis confirmed it was a work of the same man. This time, though, police got a break. A 17-year-old local with learning difficulties, Richard Buckland, confessed to Dawn's murder. But here's the catch. He swore he did not kill Linda Mann. Police thought they had their man, but something just wasn't adding up. Just 10 miles away at the University of Leicester, a geneticist named Alex Jeffries had recently stumbled upon something huge. On September 10th of 1984, while looking at an X-ray film from a routine genetics experiment, he saw it. A way to create a unique pattern from a person's DNA. It was a biological barcode. He called it a DNA fingerprint. Desperate to link Buckland to both murders, the police approached Jeffries, hoping his brand new untested technique could be the key. The results were not what anyone saw coming. Dr. Jeffries tested DNA from both crime scenes against a sample from Richard Buckland. The test confirmed that yes, both girls were killed by the same person. But then came the bombshell. The person was not Richard Buckland. For the first time in history, DNA evidence had proven someone innocent. This was incredible for Buckland, who was saved from a wrongful conviction. But it put the police back at square one. Their only suspect was innocent, and the real killer was still a ghost. So the police made a radical decision. They decided to launch the world's first ever mass DNA screening. The plan was audacious. They would ask every man between ages of 17 and 34 in the entire area to voluntarily give a blood or saliva sample. It was an unprecedented operation that involved collecting samples from nearly 5,000 men. But after months of testing, there wasn't a single match. It seemed the killer had somehow slipped through the net. But he hadn't vanished. He was a local baker named Colin Pitchfork, and he was getting nervous. With a history of sexual offenses, he knew it was only a matter of time until police knocked on his door. So he devised a plan. He begged a co-worker, Ian Kelly, to take the test for him, feeding him a lie about not wanting to be harassed by police over his old record. Kelly agreed, and just like that, Pitchfork's DNA was never in the system. His deception had worked. After all, the high-tech science and massive police work, the case finally broke because of a chance conversation in a pub one night. One night, a woman overheard a man bragging that he had taken the DNA test for his co-worker, a guy named Colin Pitchfork. Her ears must have perked up, because she reported what she heard to the police. Investigators quickly found Ian Kelly, who confessed to the scheme. On September 19th, 1987, police arrested Colin Pitchfork. They tested his DNA. It was a perfect match. He confessed almost immediately. On January 22nd, 1988, Colin Pitchfork pled guilty and was sentenced to life becoming the first murderer ever convicted with DNA evidence. But this story is about more than just catching a killer. It was the moment forensic science changed forever. A revolutionary technique not only put a monster behind bars, but just as importantly, it freed an innocent man. It armed justice with a powerful new tool that has since solved countless crimes all over the world. What if the key to solving a brutal murder was so small it was completely invisible? In 1981, a microscopic piece of evidence was all that was left of a killer who seemed to vanish into thin air. For 2 decades, it sat in storage, a silent witness to a family's unending grief and a town's fear. But what that tiny clue couldn't tell investigators in 1981, it would shout to the world 20 years later, thanks to a revolution in science that finally unmasked a killer hiding in plain sight. Picture it. June 6, 1981, it was a bright sunny Saturday in the quiet English town of Fleet, Hampshire. For 14-year-old Marion Cross, it was a day full of promise. Friends and family knew her as a shy but lively girl, both smart and studious, with a gift for the clarinet and dreams of becoming a teacher. That afternoon, she waved goodbye to her family and pedaled off on a bicycle, making the 25-mile trip to her school band practice. She would never make it home. When Marion didn't return, her worried mother and sister started a frantic search, quickly calling the police. Just hours later, their worst nightmare came true. Along a canal towpath hidden in the undergrowth, searchers found Marion's body. She had been ambushed, savagely beaten, and raped and strangled. A massive police investigation kicked off, and hundreds of local men were questioned, including soldiers from the nearby Aldershot garrison, but every lead went cold. The case stalled, leaving a family shattered and a community terrified of the monster who had stolen a young girl's future. For the Cross family, the next 2 decades were an agonizing wait. For Marion's parents, Trevor and Annie, and her two older sisters, Shirley and Sally, time didn't heal the wound. It just stretched out the silence. The case file collected dust thick with dead-end leads. A painful memory that haunted Marion's father for the rest of his life was his decision to play cricket that day instead of driving her to practice. As the years blurred into decade, and then to any real hope of finding the killer began to fade. The only thing investigators had left was the original forensics evidence, semen samples taken from Marion's body and clothes. Carefully preserved on microscopic slides in an era before DNA profiling was a common tool, this evidence was essentially useless, but investigators had the incredible foresight to protect it, gambling on the hope that one day science might just be able to give this silent witness a voice. That day finally came in 1999. Forensic science had just delivered a miracle, a technique called low copy number or LCN DNA analysis. This new method was unbelievably sensitive. It could build a full DNA profile from just a few cells, a sample size that was impossible to test before. Hampshire's police immediately launched Operation Vortex, a final, high-tech push to solve Marion's murder. They took the original microscopic slides, which had been left untouched for nearly 20 years, and applied the new LCN technique. It was a long shot, but they had to try. And it worked. By 2001, they had a complete DNA profile of the killer. The profile was uploaded to the UK's National DNA Database, and all they could do was wait. For 2 years, they checked intermittently, nothing. And then, in August of 2001, they got a hit. So who was it? The name that came back belonged to a 44-year-old security guard named Tony Jainski. His DNA was only in the system because of a recent and completely unrelated arrest for assaulting his wife. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces snapped into place. When police dug into his past, they found a chilling connection. Back in 1981, Tony was a 19-year-old Lance Corporal and Army Chief stationed at Aldershot Garrison, less than 2 miles from where Marion was murdered. He had even been questioning during the initial investigation, but was cleared after giving an alibi that was never truly verified. For 20 years, He had lived an unremarkable life, raising a family and moving between jobs, his dark secret buried. But at his trial in 2002, he couldn't hide from the science. The DNA was presented as a 1 in a billion match. It took the jury 3 hours to find him guilty of rape and murder. Tony Jaisky was sentenced to life in prison. He later tried to appeal his conviction in 2014, arguing the DNA evidence was flawed, but the court dismissed his claim as fanciful. If you believe that no case should ever go cold and that justice, no matter how long it takes, is worth the fight, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. It helps me continue to bring these important stories to light. For Marian's family, the verdict finally closed a 21-year-old chapter of agony. After the conviction, her sister Sally said the pain of her death remains. No verdict will bring Marian back to us. Nevertheless, we're grateful that Marian's killer has been brought to justice. This case is a stunning example of police persistence and the incredible power of evolving science. But above all, it's a tribute to Marian Crofts, a bright, beloved girl whose stolen future was finally honored, all because a tiny 20-year-old clue refused to stay silent. In a quiet suburb of South London, Delroy Grant was known as a family man, even a hero to some. To his neighbors, he was a devoted, full-time carer for his second wife, who was paralyzed with multiple sclerosis. He was a charmer, someone people respected. But that was a mask, because for 17 terrifying years, Delroy Grant was a monster. By night, he was a vicious predator known as the Night Stalker, who brought a reign of terror to the elderly of southeast London, managing to evade capture for nearly 2 decades. From 1992 to 2009, the seemingly ordinary man was responsible for a horrific campaign of burglaries and brutal sexual assaults. He targeted the most vulnerable, primarily elderly women living alone, in a series of crimes so awful, they became one of the most disturbing and complex investigations in the history of Scotland Yard. This is the story of his chilling double life, the shocking blunders that let him slip through the net, and the painstaking manhunt that finally brought a monster to justice. The first known attack linked to Grant happened in October of 1992, when an 89-year-old woman was brutally raped in her Croydon home. It was the start of a pattern that would haunt South London for years. The attacker, nicknamed the Night Stalker, had a method that was chillingly consistent. He'd get in through the back of the house, sometimes using tools he found in his victim's own garden shed, and once inside, he would cut the phone lines and shut off the power, plunging the home into darkness and silence. He would wake his terrified victims, mostly women between 68 and 93 years old, by shining a flashlight in their eyes. The ordeal could go on for hours. They often started with him demanding money and then escalating to him humiliating and violent sexual assaults. The psychological trauma was devastating. One victim's son said, "This has ruined the winter years of my mother's life." Another 88-year-old victim confessed, "I feared for my life and believed I was going to be murdered." The fear Grant created was so intense that entire communities changed how they lived. Many elderly residents started sleeping during the day and staying awake all night, terrified they might be next. In 1998, if a second grape was forensically linked to the first, the Metropolitan Police launched Operation Minstead. It would become the largest and most complex grape investigation in the force's history. But even though the attacker left his DNA at multiple crime scenes, he remained a ghost. A breakthrough should have came in 1999. A member of the public had reported a suspicious car after a burglary, and the license plate was traced to Delroy Grant. But here a catastrophic mistake happened. A mix-up between Grant and another man with a similar name led to the wrong DNA profile being checked. Delroy Grant was mistakenly ruled out as a suspect. That simple clerical error had horrific consequences. It allowed the Night Stalker to continue his attacks for another 10 years. A period in which he committed at least 146 more offenses. The police force would later have to apologize for the blunder that enabled so much more suffering. For years, the investigation went nowhere. By 2009, the number of attacks was rising again. and Detective Chief Inspector Colin Sutton was brought in to review the failing operation. Colin decided to shift the focus. Instead of getting bogged down by the frustrating DNA evidence, he treated the case as a pattern of burglaries, using geographical profiling and surveillance to create what he called a rat trap. His team pinpointed a 1 square mile hot zone in Shirley, Croydon, where the stalker frequently operated. In a massive undercover operation, they flooded the area with 70 officers, hidden cameras, and even a helicopter with an infrared camera. And on the night of November 14, 2009, the strategy worked. An officer spotted a suspicious man running to a silver Vauxhall Zephyria, a car that had previously identified on CCTV. The car was followed and pulled over. Inside was Delroy Grant. In his car, police found a crowbar and a woolly hat, and within hours, a DNA test gave them the forensic proof they had been seeking for 17 long years. The man who had terrorized a generation of elderly Londoners was finally in custody. The story of how he was caught is a powerful look at both the fallibility and the incredible resilience of modern policing. If you find these explorations of complex investigations compelling, consider subscribing to my channel for more. In March 2011, Delroy Grant was found guilty on 29 counts of rape, indecent assault, and burglary. He showed no remorse. The judge called him a very evil man, sentenced him to 4 life sentences with a minimum of 27 years in prison. Grant's crimes destroyed the precious final years of his victims' lives, turning their homes from a safe haven into a place of terror. His double life, caring for his disabled wife by day while preying on the vulnerable by night, remains a chilling study in human depravity. The hunt for the Night Stalker is a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of a single mistake, and the relentless determination it takes to finally catch a monster hiding in plain sight. In February 2025, after a dozen years of dead ends, a single long-forgotten clue would finally point investigators to a man who was pretty sure he'd gotten away with murder. For 12 years, he was hiding in plain sight, a neighbor who walks his dog right past the home of his victim. This was a man who had dodged justice for a crime so vicious, it left a whole community terrified and a family in pieces. But to really get how justice was finally served, we need to rewind back to a quiet English market town, a beloved retired postmistress, and a crime that would baffle investigators for over a decade. Una Crown was by all accounts a woman who loved her independence. At 86, she retired postmistress, was living in a quiet and happy life by herself in her bungalow in Wisbech, Cambridgeshire. Staying at just 4'10", she was tiny, but her family called her feisty and said she was never afraid to speak her mind. She was also incredibly security conscious, always locking her doors and careful about who she let in her home, the one place she should have been safest. But on the evening of January 12th of 2013, she was on the phone with a friend, planning a quiet night in to watch her favorite TV shows. That was the last time anyone would hear from her. The next day, when her nephew-in-law, John Payne, showed up to take her for Sunday lunch, he found a scene of horror. Una was in her hallway, surrounded by blood and burnt newspaper. She had been stabbed multiple times, and her body had been set on fire in a crude attempt to cover up the evidence. The scene was horrific, but what happened next would put the case on ice for a decade. In what was later called a grave error of judgment, the first officers on the scene thought her death was not suspicious and failed to secure the house for 2 days. That critical mistake meant potential evidence was lost for good. A post-mortem exam a couple of days later confirmed the brutal truth. Una Crown had been murdered. A major investigation was launched, but with no sign of forced entry and very few forensic leads, it hit a wall fast. For fear gripped the community. A local man named David Newton, who had done odd jobs for Una and lived nearby, was arrested but let go without charge because there just wasn't enough evidence. The case went cold, leaving Una's family without answers. And a killer on the loose. Years went by. Police made more appeals, but all they got back was silence. Cambridgeshire police later had to apologize to the family for the blunders made in those first critical days. For 10 years, the case files just collected dust, but forensic science doesn't stand still. The Cambridgeshire Police Major Crime Unit reopened the cold case, deciding to re-examine a few bits of evidence they had with brand new technology. The key turned out to be a set of fingernail clippings taken from Una's hands during the post-mortem back in 2013. At the time, forensic science just wasn't advanced enough to pull a clear DNA profile from such a small and contaminated sample. But now, using a new, incredible, sensitive technique, forensic scientists were able to isolate a male DNA profile from underneath Una's nails. When they ran it through the database, they got a direct hit. David Newton. The man who lived just a stone's throw away. The same man who was arrested and released a decade earlier. The defensive wounds on Una's hands proved she had fought back. In her final moments, she scratched her attacker, capturing the very DNA that would 12 years later finally name her killer. In April of 2024, David Newton, now in his 70s, was arrested again, at his time charged with murder of Una Crown. Investigators believe he used a key he'd copied to get into her house. Probably just looking for company. When she confronted him, he unleashed what the sentencing judge would later describe as ferocious and sustained knife attack on a defenseless old lady. In February 2025, a jury found David Newton guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 21 years. The verdict finally brought some closure to a family that had waited so long for justice. The judge made a powerful point, noting that in her desperate struggle for her life, Una Crown had essentially solved her own case as she fought her attacker. The conviction was a huge win for the persistent cold case detectives, who truly believe that no unsolved murder is ever really closed. It also shines a light on the incredible power of advancing forensic science to dig up truths that have been buried for years. For over a decade, David Newton thought he could get away with murder, but he couldn't escape the evidence his victims carried with her to the very end. What do y'all think about how new forensic technology is changing the game for solving cold cases? Drop y'all's thoughts in the comments below respectfully. If you found this story as compelling as I did, give this video a like and subscribe for more deep dives into cases where justice, no matter how long it takes, finally wins.